I can't imagine maybe God saying or Abraham saying circumcised. Say what? I don't know. It could be. So anyway, that was that's kind of a summary of kind of what we talked about last week. The 7 basic promises of God to Abraham, and also in there that the land that God was going to give to Abraham's descendants would be a forever thing, and the land of Israel and actually the part that God said He was going to give to him, and it's spelled out in the Bible, is much larger than the land of Israel is today. So we will see that today, in today's world, people keep trying to give away the land to this land for peace business, and it's just not theirs to give. That land was given to Abraham and his descendants forever, so it's not their land. It's no one's land to give away to the Muslims or Palestinians or whomever. It's just not their land to give away. And then Ariel Sharon made that mistake, and we know what happened to him and others. When they tried to give up Gaza and all that, it's eventually going to go. All of it's going to go back to Israel. All right. This lesson we will continue with the Mosaic Covenant. We just got into it. Excuse me. last week. It was given to the children of Israel at Mount Sinai, as recorded in the book of Shemot or Exodus. The Mosaic Covenant was, as we had mentioned last week, was written in a style of the Middle Eastern treaties of the time. It's called a suzerainty treaty, and remember that we said that a suzerain, that was a name for one of the leaders, or a ruler, a king at that time. So and hang in here with me on this stuff. There's a reason why we're going over this treaty format so much and in some detail, because it points out some things that are very important later on to the Jewish, the biblical meaning of Israel in the Bible. And so if I say Jewish instead of Israel sometimes, okay, it's one of those deals that they're not actually interchangeable per se, but I'll try to remember that we're talking about Israel, the children of Israel here at this point. So the Mosaic Covenant was written as a suzerainty treaty, and these treaties, a typical suzerainty treaty, had 6 elements. And let me go ahead okay, we had this deal up here last week, the suzerainty treaty there, and I don't have all of the 6 elements here, but I've got them written down. There was a preamble, and the preamble identified the parties involved in the treaty. It was the author, the title of the sovereign party, and usually some of his genealogy. It usually emphasizes the greatness of the king or the dominant party. Now, there you will find also sometimes there were suzerainty treaties um, that um, that were among equals, and so that what it amounted to is you had two powerful nations, or two nations that had about the same. They were kind of equal, and and so let's see. I don't know which we're on. Yeah, I'm going to stay here on this one for a second, and then we'll go on to the other ones. In fact, we can go back. This suzerainty vassal treatment here is the chapter before the Ten Commandments, and it's a little bit abbreviated because you got the traditional preamble, and in the Bible they're pretty abbreviated. If you were to read a suzerainty treaty from back in the day, they went to great lengths and a lot of paragraphs and so forth to talk about the king, how good and gracious he was, even though he was a scoundrel. So anyway, let's see, and we'll go on to then this other one here, and we'll talk about it. There was a traditional preamble, and a preamble. It's like to our Constitution. Our preamble to our U.S. Constitution says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union," and on and on. It talks about who it is that is actually in the treaty, and so the second part of the suzerainty treaty was called a prologue. And this lists the deeds already performed by the suzerain, the king, the ruler, on behalf of the vassal, the subservient or the weaker party in this treaty. Like I said, sometimes there were treaties, suzerainty treaty between equals or nearly equals, so that basically it was a treaty that says, okay, we're just going to make sure that we stick with everybody's boundary lines, and that here are the boundaries, and you will keep those boundaries, and I will keep these boundaries, and we're not going to trespass on each other, and so that it avoided unnecessary wars or conflicts. But generally speaking, the suzerainty treaty was among non-equals, to where you had a superior king and an inferior king. This prologue section would outline the previous relationships of the two that the two groups had up until that point, with historical detail and facts that are very beneficial to scholars today, because it kind of gives us gives scholars an idea of what was going on in history at that time. One of the more important scholars today is a guy named George Mendenhall, and he did a lot of work back in the 60s on focusing on this type of covenant and how it pertained to Israelite traditions. Okay, the suzerain would document previous events in which they did a favor that benefited the vassal. Basically, they're saying, remember when we did all of this for you, and we will see that in Exodus and also in Deuteronomy. The purpose of this would show that the more powerful group was merciful and giving. Therefore, the vassal should obey the stipulations that are presented in the treaty. It discusses the relationship between them as a personal relationship instead of a solely political one. More importantly, in this section, the vassal is agreeing to future obedience for the benefits that he received in the past without deserving them. And I think it also, in some cases, it was a deal where, okay, you guys remember what we did before, and you better behave yourself, or remember what we did to that other country, and you don't want to put yourself in that situation. The third section was stipulations, and these were the terms that were to be upheld by the vassal for the life of the treaty. It defines how the vassal is obligated and gives more of the legalities associated with the covenant. Number 4 is a provision for an annual public reading, and a copy of the treaty was to be read aloud annually in the vassal state for the purposes of renewal and to inform the public of the expectations involved and increase respect for the sovereign party, usually the king. Number 5, the fifth section of it was a divine witness to the treaty. They would usually call the deities of both the suzerain and the vassal state. If each one of them had their own set of deities, they would call upon their deities to witness this treaty, and so that that somehow elevated it to something just beyond the workings of mere mortal men. The last section of a suzerainty treaty was that the blessings, if the stipulations of the treaty were held, and curses if the stipulations were not upheld. It's the benefits and all the penalties that resulted in either obedience or disobedience. And we can see on here we are, the Exodus 20. That's of course the 10 Commandments. That you've got the traditional preamble, and it's basically, it says, and then God said, and I'll pull it up. Now I'm reading from the Complete Jewish Bible by David Stern, the translation by David Stern. That first verse, it says, then God said, and so it's defining who the sovereign was, who we're talking about here, and it uses the Yod He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton, and that's just as an aside. One of my personal prejudices here is that the Yod He Vav He, the Tetragrammaton, is something we don't try to pronounce. It's there in today's world. There's a lot of people that sacred namers that go around telling you that you have to, if you want the blessings of God, you have to somehow come up with some pronunciation of the 4 letters in Hebrew that that God will recognize. Otherwise, He won't hear your prayers and so forth. The only problem with that is that it seems like the various sacred name groups, they have different pronunciations of the word. So, which one is right, I don't know. I know that traditionally Jewish people will not even attempt to pronounce the word. We just use what we call circumlocutions. We will say the Creator, or Adonai, or Elohim, Eloheinu, our God, different things. Even Yeshua never used a proper name for God. He always used circumlocutions. He would, some of his terms would be the kingdom of heaven. That was a term that was very well known, recognized in his day for speaking about who God really was, or his name anyway. We just didn't use the name. So that was an aside, and we'll go on.
But when Jesus prayed, he to give us the example, he said, "Our Father, who art in heaven." And the priests were allowed. The priests knew how to pronounce the high priest would use it once a year, and that was all.
Traditionally, the
and
priest,
that was lost.
only the priest used the pronunciation, and he would do that during his prayers on the Day of Atonement. And basically, it was so holy, and it goes back to here in the Ten Commandments in the Exodus Treaty, that where God said, you're to don't use my name in vain. And so traditionally, what we've done is to say, okay, well, if we don't pronounce it, we don't use the name, then we can't very well go on. We can't take that name in vain if we don't use it. So it's kind of a fence around that law. Let's go on. The names and titles. Okay, I've already kind of touched on that. It says, I am Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So that is his name. And again, these are very abbreviated compared to what a secular suzerainty treaty would have been. There's the historical prologue here. Who brought you out of Egypt. It says, then God said all these words, I am Adonai, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the abode of slavery. Now, you remember what we had what I'd mentioned before, that in the suzerain treaty, or they would have a prologue that would list the deeds that were already performed by the sovereign for the benefit or on behalf of the vassal, the servants, the people that served the king. And so God is saying here, I am the Lord your God, I am Adonai your God, and who brought you out of Egypt. That's what I did for you. So there's that part of it. And then we go on to the actual 10 commandments that we have here. And it says, you are to have no other gods before me. These are the stipulations when we go into talking about the stipulations in verses 3 through 17. And some of these stipulations will actually have the blessings or the curses in them, as they mention them right there. So they're not at the end of the treaty. So we go on. I'm going to go ahead and read these things. You are to have no other gods before me. Number 4, you are not to make for yourselves a carved image or any kind of representation of anything in heaven above or on the earth below or in the water below the shoreline. You are not to bow down to them or serve them, for I, Adonai your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sins of the parents to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but displaying grace to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and obey my mitzvot. That always, I look at that and I say, wow, what a gracious God we serve, because he said, if you do bad, I'm going to, I can punish you. I will punish down to the 4th generation. But if you do well, if you obey, if you love me, I'll bless you to 1,000 generations. And, can you imagine what how many generations are 1,000 generations? I don't think that that we actually have 1,000 generations. Or we're just about maybe 1,000 generations. If a generation is 40 years, that would be 40,000 years. So we haven't got there yet. The written history of mankind is only about 5,000 or 6,000 years. So God said he'll bless you to 1,000 generations. That's we got a long way to go. The 7th one, he said, or verse 7, you are not to use lightly the name of Adonai your God, because Adonai will not leave unpunished someone who uses his name lightly. And next is remember the day, Shabbat, to set it apart for God. You have 6 days to labor and do all your work, but on the 7th day is a Shabbat for Adonai your God. On it you are not to do any kind of work, not you, your son, or your daughter, or your male or female slave, nor your livestock, and not the foreigner staying with you inside the gates to your property. For in 6 days Adonai made heaven and earth, the sea, and everything in them, but on the 7th day he rested. This is why Adonai blessed the day, Shabbat, and separated it for himself. And, of course, this is something that traditionally we read for our beginning of our Shabbat services, our Shabbat observances, even in our homes. It said, honor your father and mother, and so that you may live long in the land which Adonai your God is giving you. Here again, it's a stipulation, but then it's got the blessing along with it, that you honor them, and then you'll have a long life. It said, do not murder, do not commit adultery, do not steal, do not give false evidence against your neighbor, do not covet your neighbor's house, do not covet your neighbor's wife, his male or female slave, his ox, his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And so that ends up bringing in all of the. What are you doing? That brings up to the end of all of the 10 Commandments there, and we'll see here that we have the blessings. You got all the stipulations, and he did blessings and curses in verse 5b and 6 and 7b and 12b. So okay, well, we got, so that means, that's what it means to use his name in vain. When we treat it as ordinary, we are profaning his name. Yes, I believe that's that's one way that you can profane the name of God, is to treat it as common. Because it says his name is holy. And what is holy? It's set apart. It's something that is special. So if we use the name, and that, I've gotten into discussions with people before who try to use, they say, well, they're going to use this name, what they consider the pronunciation of the name, because they said, God said, this is the name by which I shall be known. Well, that is true, but I'd liken it to where, I think I've said this before in some of the lessons, that my father had a name by which he was known. I have a name by which I am known. And similar to my father, I was not invited, nor was I ever welcomed to call him by his first name. It would have been the height of arrogance and disrespectful and pretty stupid, you get right down to it. I don't know what would have ever happened if I'd come up and said, hey, Dale, how you doing? And after I got picked up off the floor, we might have a discussion. But, my children were never allowed to call us by our first names. We never allowed them to call other adults by their first name, because it was disrespectful. And so I think that by the same token, even though God says, this is the name by which I will be known, and actually he had many names by which he was known, that actually they identified a characteristic of God, and that is actually a fascinating study in itself, that the names of God. And Ray says, if Hashem doesn't hear our prayer, if we do not use his name, he wouldn't hear anyone's prayer, including the prayer for salvation. That's it exactly. That's the catch-22. The very thing that these sacred neighbors come out and say, you got to use the name. Well, how's a person that is agnostic and atheist, that they have no religious background at all, how would they ever know to call him by a name, the proper name? So God would never hear you. So it's that's I don't know. That's kind of a dumb thing that I see with the sacred namers. But anyway, we're going to go on.
I want to say in there, I know when we found our grandson floating in the backyard pool at 21 months old, he drowned, and he was definitely dead. His eyes were completely dilated. You couldn't even see the brown of his irises. He was dead, cold, blue. We don't know how long he'd been in there, but I was speaking in tongues, blowing into his mouth and speaking in tongues. I didn't say a name. I didn't know what, because I did not know how to pray. I was just frantically speaking in tongues and blowing into his mouth. And God heard my prayer because he gave him back to us.
Yeah, that's true. The very idea that God is not going to listen to one of us because we don't pronounce something right. That's like people saying, well, his name was Yeshua. It wasn't Jesus or Jesus or Yesu or whatever the different names that, in the various languages of the world that you'll see. It's Yeshua, and that's ridiculous stuff. So
he made all the languages.
He made it.
At the Tower of Babel.
He can hear us. He can hear us.
He knows every language. He made languages.
So at any rate, let's go on. All right. Now we mentioned last week some important stuff. The Mosaic Covenant did not replace or alter the Abrahamic Covenant, and it was a national constitution for Israel, and it was conditional. We see these blessings and curses. So if you obey, you'll be blessed. If you disobey, you'll be cursed. We see that the book of Deuteronomy, the entire book it's just saturated with the suzerain treaty language and structure. It is not properly the treaty document itself, but is based upon the treaty, making reference to it all often. And here's some examples. If we look, I'm just going to pull this up real quick as some examples in Deuteronomy, Devarim, chapter 4 and 32. Here's a historical prologue for you. Deuteronomy 4:32 says, "Indeed, inquire about the past before you were born. Since the day God created human beings on the earth, from one end of heaven to the other, has there ever been anything as wonderful as this? Has anyone heard anything like it? Did any other people ever hear the voice of God speaking out of a fire as you have heard and stay alive? Or has God ever tried to go and take for himself a nation from the very bowels of another nation by means of ordeals, signs, wonders, war, and a mighty hand, an outstretched arm, and great terrors, like all that Adonai your God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes?" See, so we're seeing a little bit. Now, this is more in keeping with what the suzerain treaties would have been like, where they go into paragraph, a long and lengthy description of what the sovereign did for you. And so that's kind of a brief example. You go down to 44, and this is the Torah which Moshe placed before the people of Israel. These are the instructions, laws, and rulings which Moshe presented to the people of Israel after they had come out of Egypt, beyond the Yarden River, in the valley across from the Beit Peor, in the land of the Sihon king of the Amorite, who lived in Heshbon, whom Moses Moshe and the people of Israel defeated when they came out of Egypt. And it goes on with what they had talked about, what the curses. Because if you go into the 5th chapter, there it's again it's a repeat of the stipulations, basically the repeat of the 10 Commandments. And so if you go further down in chapter 6, verse 4, and so what do we find in 6 verse 4? Very famous thing for us in the Messianic world. It's Deuteronomy 6:4. Of course, it's the Shema. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear Israel, Adonai, our God, Adonai is one. And so from there, that's the central prayer of all Judaism right there. And that starts the blessings and the curses portion in Deuteronomy. So if you go to chapter 8, that in Deuteronomy, that reflects basically chapter 8 and 11. You'll find all the elements of the suzerain treaty in there, and then chapter 17 and 14, it reflects the relationship of a vassal king to the suzerain. So that's what we find in Deuteronomy. Want to go on with that. So suffice it to say, we could spend actually a couple of hours just sitting here talking about the actual treaties and how that they the structure and so forth. And so the question sometimes can be asked, which came first? These treaties that we see with Mosaic in the Mosaic Covenant, was that the first one, and that came up with God? God gave the world this treaty, and then all the other ones followed suit, or was this in a form that was already in play in the near Middle East at the time? We really don't know, and I don't know that it's important, but I will say that that's a good point. Ray had said that Deuteronomy means Deuteronomos in the Greek. It means the second law or the second Torah. That is a second reading of the Torah, and God did he communicated in a way that the people would understand exactly. I mean, he's not going to. It's like today, people say the Bible is so hard. No, it's not that hard to read it and figure out a moral lifestyle that God wants us to live. And so going on here, it's kind of interesting that the Mosaic Covenant was given to a motley collection of former slaves with no real resources and no direction in life, and really not even a national identity at this point. They were just developing a national identity. Prior to this time, they had been a collection of tribal entities. Each of the 12 tribes, they had their own groupings and possibly their own characteristics and maybe even some of their own customs. We know that the different tribes reacted differently to different situations. So up until this time, the children of Israel were a collection of 12 tribes, albeit a very large collection. But now they're starting to develop a national entity. But what we see here is that God, this Mosaic Covenant, it shows that God cares for the poor, the needy, the dispossessed, the aged, the orphaned, the widows, the defenseless. All of these things are written out in the Mosaic Covenant and it's of course it's summed up later on in Deuteronomy 6. Where it says, "Ve'ahavta l'orecha kamocha," you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And so, if your neighbor is, one of these poor, needy, dispossessed, aged, you're supposed to take care of them. But it also does go into detail later on as to how to do this. Now, where do we see this again? We see this later on with in a New Testament parallel. Yeshua quoted Isaiah when he's starting his ministry. He's there in the I believe he was, if I'm not mistaken, he quoted this in the synagogue in Capernaum, and we've actually stood right there in that synagogue, in the ruins of it in Capernaum, where he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he hath appointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He hath sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and recovering of sight to the blind, to set at liberty them that are bruised." Of course, this is coming from Isaiah. This is a quote from Isaiah, and so we see that Yeshua is bringing that Old Testament tradition and instructions of God into the New Testament, and he's applying that as his actual ministry. And so, and I want to go to this the Exodus story a little bit. That starts with because this is central. We're talking again. This is central to who Israel is in the Bible. The Exodus story, of course, starts with the call of Moshe, and that's where God reveals his name to Moshe. The Yod He Vav He. But later on, he says that he would always be the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so then later on, like I said, he revealed different parts of his names at different times to reveal a different aspect of his character. And because he does say that one of the names is the "I am who I am." When they say, "Well, who is it that says that let my people go?" He says, "Tell them that I am that I am," or "I am who I am." That's a concept that's a little hard for us to understand today. It doesn't translate very well, and it's also the one that says, "I act as I act," or even it's other translated maybe, "I am he who causes to be." Now this is very much different than the gods of the time, the little g gods that the nations had at that time. Because what did their gods have? Their gods had a name, like their name was Ra, or the various deities, Zeus, or of course that's a lot later. But the Egyptians, they had a whole bunch of names for different gods, and they were all different entities, but they definitely had a name. And so God is basically saying here, said, I'm much bigger than just a name. I'm a concept. I'm a spirit. I'm the one that causes everything to be. And so that was a much greater concept than the idea of I'm the sun god Ra, or some of these others that they had that came up with in the Egyptian. Isis and is another one that in Egypt. So the story continues with Moshe going to Pharaoh multiple times and saying, "Let my people go." And each time these were followed by a plague that came upon the Egyptian people, but it left the Israelites alone because they were over in the land of Goshen. They were protected. Um, um, yeah, another name for God as or another interpretation of it is I am who I will be, and so there again, it's a little bit mystical for some of us, and I'll admit it is mystical.
You can't put him in a box.
So,
he will be what he wants to be and do what he wants to do, and he will heal as he sees fit and answer prayer as he sees fit. You can't put him in a box.
So that's just one of the characteristics of God. The plagues that came upon the Egyptian people. I'd mentioned it a couple of months ago when we were teaching about Pesach, that each one of the plagues was a direct confrontation with one of the gods of Egypt. When the Nile turned to blood, the Nile it had a name for one of their gods. When they had the frogs, well, the frogs were one of their gods. If you can imagine, people worshiping an old toady frog, and so what happened? God says, okay, yeah, you want to worship frogs? I'll give you frogs. And so he gave them frogs to the point that the entire land stunk of dead frogs. Each one of these was a direct defeat of a known god that Egypt worshipped. So going on, the final plague, of course, was the one against the firstborn. And of course, the firstborn of the Egyptian pharaoh, the son, was recognized. That's a deity because the pharaoh was recognized as a deity, and so that was a direct defeat. And so the children of Israel, of course, were spared this because of their instructions to put the blood over the doorposts and on each side the sacrifice of the lamb. And Israel then leaves Egypt not as a group of slaves, but as a massive, it's still a fledgling nation, but they were a massive nation at this point. And this Exodus story foreshadows God's greatest demonstration of redemption with the sacrifice of Yeshua for the sins of the entire world. The Exodus is at the heart of Torah. I mean, let's face it, that's the biggest story within Torah. And just as God's love and his grace is at the heart of Exodus because God brought them out. And so this is what I say. This is the true and the full nature of the Mosaic revelation and the whole of the Tanakh. So it always kind of, I have to shake my head when people talk about the law as being, well, the law was something that it was cruel and it was harsh and it was something that, thank God we're not under the law anymore, and I just kind of have to shake my head because they don't realize that the law was that it was a law of grace, and so I gotta keep rolling on here. The promise of remember that the promise to Abraham that his seed would be a blessing to the nations. In Exodus 19:6, God chose Israel to be a kingdom of priests. What is the function of a priest? A priest is a mediator between God and man. Okay, that's what a priest does. You see that format or that form in the Catholic Church today. People don't pray to God; they pray to the priest, or they go to the priest, and then the priest then prays to God on their behalf. But so Israel's role was to be, God says, I want you to be a nation of priests. So their role then was to be a mediator between God and all the nations. So this is an identity thing for Israel. And so that would show the nations, that they would show the nations what blessings flowed to those who followed the precepts of the Lord. Now, remember when I read the Ten Commandments, Exodus 20, how that it was a modified suzerainty treaty, kind of in an abbreviated form. But I wanted to bring out today, before before we cut it down, we got about 5 minutes here, about Shabbat, about the Sabbath, because I think it can be kind of important to us. You'll notice that in the Ten Commandments, the biggest portion of wording in there for any one commandment is talking about Shabbat. It's here. It is. There's three of the laws of the Ten Commandments that talk about God and man and his relationship to God. That I'm the Lord your God. You just have no more gods before me. Don't make any graven images. Don't take my name in vain. And then they got the Shabbat, the Sabbath, and then you got all the other ones that don't murder, don't kill, or don't steal, don't chase your neighbor's wife, and all that kind of stuff. Why the Shabbat? Right? Where does this come out right in the middle of it? And so I think that something I want to bring out, God said to keep the Shabbat. Where do we first see the Shabbat, the Sabbath? We see it where God rested after the creation. After the 6 days, on the seventh day, he said he rested. Now, do you really believe that God had to rest? I don't believe that God had to rest. He wasn't wore out from creating the world, although it was a great accomplishment. But, it said he just spoke them into existence. So the Lord, I think that the Shabbat was not so much there as a rest for God, but it was a memorial of his creation. Okay, look at it that way. It was a memorial of his creation. And also that before Israel became a nation and we had these laws that God had given, there was no concept of a 7-day week. And in fact, there's evidence in some cases that they had like a 10-day week or a 12-day week, but there was never any day of rest anywhere in those things. There was not a time where you could kick back and watch a ball game. So this concept of a 7-day week with a day of rest was unique to Israel. So here God is giving Israel, his chosen people, a blessing that was not there in all the other treaties and the other nations. There are many examples also where the God's Torah gave for an instance, where we talk about eye for an eye. That does not mean that if somebody pokes you in the eye, then you get to go and poke them in the eye. It means that laws and the punishments in the judicial system must be just. They must match the crime. So you don't kill somebody because they slandered your name. You don't, or you don't go out and kill your daughter as an honor killing because she wore blue jeans. It's just that we see in some instances today. And so God had a different form for his people, a law of justice and of mercy. The Mosaic Covenant was a law was a covenant of mercy and a covenant of justice. And this keeping the Sabbath, my goodness, that's the end of my the slides there. The Sabbath, I think, is an important thing, and the Sabbath. I was trying to research it later on, and there's some speculation that in Revelation, the Shabbat may very well be the sign of God's people. We always focus on this mark of the beast, that you're going to have something stamped on your forehead and on your hand, and so on and so forth. But it says God's people will also have a sign. And so there's some speculation in that, and I think maybe it's pretty good, that in the end days, God's people will be known because they're keeping the Sabbath. Okay, and here's a good comment by Brian. Says, Adonai rested to reflect upon and enjoy his creation. We should keep Shabbat not just to rest, but to reflect upon and enjoy the fruits of our labor. Absolutely, to be thankful for it, and also to, like I said, Shabbat was a memorial of creation. So it's a good time to just take that day and reflect on the blessings that God has given us from our health, being able to get up in the morning, and to our health, and those of you who are wealthy, that you can thank God for that, for your children, for your grandchildren. I'm especially thankful for my grandchildren. Only if I'd known that they were that much fun, I would have had them first before those stinking kids. So,
well, it's even the feast that, he commanded his people to keep the feast. And the purpose of the feast were to remember his blessings, remember his miracles, and be thankful, give him honor.
So, all right. So now, I think we've kind of come to the end. Next week we're going to be talking a little bit more, I think, about the relationship of Israel and the vine, the true vine, and the Gentiles, and so forth. I'd like to reflect on that, because again, it would talk about Israel's place in the Bible, and because that is crucial then to knowing, okay, where are we going with this Messianic Judaism that we're in today? That some of us in this teaching are. Not everyone in our lessons are part of a Messianic congregation. Some are, some are not. But I think it's important that we talk about some of those things, and that's what we'll be doing the next. I think next week is that's what I'm planning anyway. Let's see. Ray says Exodus 31:17 says that the Shabbat is a sign of the covenant between him and his people. Exactly right. And I think that sign, that covenant, is what I was talking about in Revelation. It may very well be that sign of the Shabbat carries over and lets people know, okay, these are the people who are following the one true God, the ones that keep his Shabbat. And it was a memorial. It was something that we're to keep forever. And forever, what does that forever mean? Forever means forever. So anyway, let me go ahead and open it up to anybody got a question or a comment that we haven't already addressed. And somebody is sending me a massage here.
He wants the
okay.
Recording.
Yep. I'm going to be talking to some people this weekend. They're going to try to help me with these recordings as to how to do that. Somebody that's more of a high-tech redneck than I am, that get these recordings out to where everybody can use them. So How about it? Anybody got any comments, or you want to throw mud or whatever? Have at it, because we'll discuss it here. I'm waiting. So jump in there. Oh boy. Nobody said. Nobody said. Yeah. Go ahead.
Hey, Steve. This is Sylvia.
Yeah.
I wanted to hear your thought concerning people who believe that the Sabbath doesn't apply anymore to Christians, because I have a scripture that I think about, and it says, pray that the end doesn't come on the Sabbath or in winter. And so it appears to me that God still has a place for Sabbath in our lives. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Personally, I believe that the day of worship should be on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. But we do have some writings from Rav Shaul, from Paul, who says that let's not get too carried away or too wound up on particular days, where you count one day more important than another. Now, I find that a little bit strange, because the concept of worshiping on any other day other than Shabbat was not even thought about in Paul's day. That did not come about until later on, when they started talking more about the Lord's Day, meaning the commemorating his resurrection, which would have been on a Saturday night through Sunday morning time frame. I don't know. I think that my own personal belief is that the proper day to worship the Lord is on Shabbat. But I think God probably is a lot more merciful than a lot of us are. So I would say that I'm glad I'm not a judge, but eventually I do believe that the keeping of Shabbat in the end times, say the tribulation times and so forth, would be a sign that okay, these are the people who are following God. Because I will probably in this study get into a little bit more about how I believe getting into some eschatology, because you can't talk about Messianic Judaism and the role of Israel without getting into some end time eschatology of what is Israel's role in the end, and what is how are they going to fit in the end times. So I think we'll have to I'm not going to go into it right now, but there are differences of opinion, and we'll just throw them out there, and you'll have to kind of come up with your own as to whether I do believe that I do not believe, let's say it that way, in replacement theology, where that the church has replaced Israel. There is still a time and a place for Israel, and there's a time and a place for the non-Jewish believers in the end times. And is Shabbat going to be the separation between those of us who tend more toward the Jewish belief, or what? I don't know. But I do believe that Israel, the Shabbat is important, and that is the proper day.
Steve?
Yes, sir.
Just real quick, this is Ray. If we go to Leviticus chapter 23, and the first 3 verses, or actually verse 3 in particular, that's the first appointed time. Hashem is addressing the Shabbat right there. There are 6 days when you may work, but the 7th day is a day of Sabbath rest, a day of sacred assembly. You are not to do any work. Wherever you live, it is a Sabbath to the Lord. This is the first Moed, the first appointed time. Hashem shows up on all his appointed times. Shouldn't we I don't see anywhere in Scripture where the Sabbath, the seventh-day Shabbat,
Yeah,
as
I agree with you wholeheartedly, Ray, that, that is absolutely, of all of his feasts and all of his moed, that is the one where he starts it out. And it says, and there's a place and I can't remember it right offhand, where it says, above all else, keep the Sabbath.
exactly, and the passage of Scripture that you were referring to about Rav Shaul speaking to the people about upholding one day above another, et cetera, et cetera. I think if we go back, I'm not sure, but I thought that might have been in Colossians, but I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and see. But it may be referring to the pagan days. I find it hard to believe that Shaul would discount the Shabbat.
Well, and that was my point, is that I personally think that it's the Shabbat is when we should be worshiping the Lord. I think that Rav Shaul was of that mindset, and that what he was saying was that, okay, there are those who have some other days that they keep, they want to commemorate this or that or the other. And he said, let every man be convinced in his own mind. But when it comes right down to it, there's only one Shabbat, and I cannot imagine that we would ever find Paul saying, whatever day, Thursday, you like Thursday, go ahead with Thursday, I don't care,
But at the same time, I don't think that people are going to be kept out of heaven just because they were raised to celebrate the.
No, it's not we're not talking about works righteousness. We're talking
Right.
about God's commandments. And Yeshua himself observed the Shabbat. He went to the synagogue every Shabbat.
Yeah.
Following his footsteps.
But to serve it to celebrate it on a different day is not the unpardonable sin. Christians who celebrate it on Sunday are not going to go to hell because they didn't celebrate it on Saturday.
Right, nobody is saying that. But when is the Shabbat?
Well, there's no, in my mind, there's no question. Shabbat is the last day of the week. That is,
right.
And so it's like you said there, and what God has said. These are my these are my moed. These are my feasts, my festivals. These are the things. He says that's where I'm going to show up. You want to come commune with me? Okay, I'm going to be there on the last day. And so I would say that the people that perhaps maybe they're missing out a little bit. They're not getting the full banquet. They're getting McDonald's instead of Ruth's Steakhouse or
Right.
Morton's. They're having to settle for McDonald's.
The point is, we're not talking about a works righteousness system. This is not a works righteousness situation here. It's just a matter of being obedient to what God says.
Yes.
We should be doing.
Yeah, and I have to agree with you there on that, Ray. That I would never ever tell anybody that you want to do Sunday, that's fine. I can't really do that because I say it is Saturday. And what you do, you have to answer to God for if you're gonna blow off Shabbat and do some other time time frame. So. That's I have to do that as as a leader in a messianic congregation and to say those things, because that's what I really actually believe is the Shabbat is the proper day. So I think we've come to the end. People are starting to drop off. I'm going to go ahead and stop.